So welcome everybody. I think that we're still missing a couple of people, so I'm gonna wait one more minute. Yeah, we're missing one student, I think. Let's give her another minute to arrive. All right, well, I guess I'm going to get started, and maybe Olivia will join us in a little bit. Um, I would like to welcome everybody to Panel 6, How to Learn from an Art Design Racial Crisis. I am Dan Levinson Wilk. I teach American history here. I'm joined by Molly Schoen, who is my office mate, and I always forget the name of her title, but it's visual something coordinator or something. And we are also joined by Michaela Coy, Amani Doale, Ria Vias, Shin Lian, Joanne Shi, Olivia Moss, and Paige Johnston, who are all students here at FIT. Thank you. If we could stop sharing that, and then I need to get permission to share on my computer, India. Terrific. So we're going to run a lesson plan, and then I will explain what the purpose of this lesson plan is, and we'll discuss a little bit afterwards. I also want to say that the students have not really been informed about what this lesson plan is about. They're, I think, a little anxious about this, so we'll be patient with them. All right, give me just a second to share this. And I want to, hold on one second. I'm going to make this a little bit bigger for all of you. Here we go. So, Dana Schutz's Open Casket, lesson plan on how to learn from an art or design racial crisis. Hold on, I have to move my picture screen out of the way so I can read the text. The Whitney Biennial, held every 2 years at the Whitney Museum in New York City, is one of the most important and prestigious exhibitions of contemporary art in the world. For the 2017 Whitney Biennial, curators Christopher Y. Liu and Mia Locke included 2 paintings by Dana Schutz. One, Elevator, 2017, depicted people and giant insects in an elevator. And I actually have a lot more to say about this painting later on if anybody's interested. But it's not the subject of this lesson plan. The other painting, Open Casket, depicted Emmett Till. Till was born in 1941 in Chicago, a child of the Great Migration. His mother had come north with her family from the Mississippi Delta in the 1920s at the age of 2. Till grew up on the south side of Chicago, where he had many friends and enjoyed playing pickup basketball or baseball games, playing branks, and dressing snazzy. In 1955, his uncle Mose Wright came up from Mississippi to visit and regaled Emmett with stories of the South. Emmett begged to visit, and despite misgivings, his mother said yes. In Mississippi, white lynchers murdered Till, supposedly for flirting with a white woman. He was 14 years old. His mother fought to have his body returned to Chicago and shown at his funeral in an open casket so the world could see what the murderers had done to her son. Photographs in the press made Till's murder a national and international scandal and a central moment in the civil rights movement. Is the era of lynching over? Legal scholar Michelle Ava DuVernay that modern mass policing and incarceration of African Americans replaced the Jim Crow system of legal segregation that Emmett Till knew. In each era, white supremacy was consistently enforced over many decades through the selective use of murder to terrorize a community. In August 2016, a month after the deaths of Alton Sterling and Philando Castile at the hands of the police, Dana Schutz started painting a portrait of Emmett Till. Soon after the 2017 Whitney Biennial opened, artist Parker Bright began to stand in front of the painting as a protest, with Black Death spectacle written on the back of his shirt. Artist Hannah Black published an open letter on Facebook asking Liu and Locke to destroy the painting. writing, "It is not acceptable for a white person to transmute Black suffering into profit and fun, though the practice has been normalized for a long time." Scandal grew, with arguments on both sides published in leading periodicals. In Hyperallergic, artist and scholar Coco Fusco accused the protesters of a deeply puritanical and anti-intellectual strain in American culture that expresses itself by putting moral judgment before aesthetic understanding, and she described a long history of anti-racist art by white artists that she supported. Pressure built on Whitney Biennial curators Christopher Liu and Mia Locks to respond. They planned a community meeting about the painting at the Whitney, hosted by poet Claudia Rankine. Conversation number 1. Students, imagine you are Dana Schutz. How do you respond to the controversy surrounding your paintings? So I'm going to stop sharing for the moment, and I'm going to give the students a minute or two to think about this. And as soon as any of the students are ready, I notice students, some of you have turned your cameras off. Please try to turn them back on again, if you can. And share your thoughts. If you were Dana Schutz and you had been accused of a kind of negative form of cultural appropriation, how would you respond? And I will call on you if nobody steps up to speak first.
I can start.
Okay, Paige, go ahead.
So I think first off, I would apologize for people interpreting it that way and try to, because what she was fighting, I guess she was explaining how she was kind of just painting a part of history. And I guess it is understandable, but since white people aren't a part of that culture, we can't necessarily say how others would feel painting that. And if that was happening, if it was something that was like how other people disliked it and others, it's just a very hard situation, honestly. It's a very hard question too. Like, I don't even know how to answer it.
So, Paige, you've already said that you would apologize. In what venue would you apologize? Would you go directly to the protesters? Would you publish something?
Probably publish something.
Okay, thank you. Others, jump in.
If I may, I think in a situation like this, the most important thing is to kind of find the to understand with empathy what really the issue is and to educate yourself on why something that you perceive to be potentially innocent could be seen in such a different way, because obviously that is a perspective that was not initially thought of when the painting was made. And so I think I would try to speak to the protesters and speak to the people that feel very strongly about the painting and to better understand where I went wrong and what I can do better. And then, like Paige mentioned, probably issue a formal apology and see if there are any avenues that I can take that would show that I'm regretful and to kind of see if I can turn the situation into something better.
Mm-hmm. Would you, it seems like there's a sequence here, Ria, that you would first talk to the protesters before publishing anything. Is that right? And do you think that's important to have the conversation before going public?
I think so, because even an apology, though it comes from a good place, doesn't necessarily indicate understanding. And so, I mean, I can apologize for doing something wrong, but do I really know what I did wrong? So I think educating yourself first and foremost shows also that your apology is sincere because you were willing to understand your mistake.
Thank you. Anybody else want to add their 2 cents?
Yeah, I'll jump in. It's funny how this is the lesson plan because I'll use an example, something I just saw recently. So with the increased violence against Asian Americans right now, there was this artist that she's French and she decided to name herself Kinoko, I think it was. That's not her name. And she started to paint images of Asians, particularly of Asian women, being brutalized, and she said it was under horror, but everyone's telling her that it's wrong and that you can't be painting subjects like this because you're profiting off of the violence against Asian Americans. And I think this relates definitely to Dana's case. I'm not sure if that was her intention to profit off of basically African American violence, but I think the first step really is to just understand why people are upset. Because when you understand why people are upset, you will your apology will actually make sense. Because you can't apologize for something you don't understand what you're apologizing for.
Right.
And it's important to apologize to the people that are actually hurt rather than the general public, because not everyone is going to feel the same way.
I think that the point that you raise about profiting off of other people's suffering was very key to this debate as well. And in fact, afterwards, Dana Schutt said, I never intend to sell this painting. I never intend to profit off of it. She said that that had always been her intent, although I'm not sure if everybody believed her, that originally she never had any intent to sell it. But that became a very key piece of the debate.
I guess this would just be a good lesson for her then.
We briefly lost Dan with a poor connection. So Makayla, you can continuously talk.
That's
Okay.
terrific. I'm back.
Going in and out.
I think I'm back. Can you hear me now? Okay, good.
Yes.
So I was just asking if you have a link to this French artist that's been so controversial. Did you?
She privated her Instagram. I think you could probably find her on Twitter. I'll look her up for you. Then I'll put it in the chat box.
Thank you. Amani, I saw you had your hand up also. Do you want to say something now?
I actually was gonna say something similar. Like if the artist came in the beginning and they just said that that was not their intention, and to show that that was not their intention, if they sat down with the people that were protesting and just were like educating themselves, and they told them like, oh, I didn't mean it in that way. This is not what I was trying to do, and they try to get their point across, even though I'm not sure how much they can get it across, because I'm sure the other people were like, they had already their opinions. So, but at least to try to get your point across to the other people, and then after that say, oh, okay, I'm here, you guys can educate me now, and I want to learn more about where I did wrong, where I went wrong, and so I can fix it. I think then we could like that's how I personally would have done it, like, you know, to just, and then after that I will release the apology, of course, publicly, to show that I learned, and I will, because then I will have something to talk about in my apology as of the steps that I took before releasing this apology, not just writing some statement that my PR wrote and just posted somewhere or like publish it, and that wouldn't make any sense.
Thank you. Joanne or Shin, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, can I jump in?
Please.
Oh, yeah. So if I were to look at this issue on the bright side, maybe like the controversy of this whole thing can bring people's attention to this issue instead of leaving it like totally unseen. Yeah, so people can like through this event, people can start talking about this kind of issues, and yeah.
Thank you. Joanne, any last thought?
actually heard of the event before, so I think that I read an article where she said that she actually did not regret making the painting at all, and like she wouldn't say that she would not, she hadn't done it because she actually was able to learn a lot through it from talking to the protesters. I think that's, yeah, going off of what she said, that might be the positive impact of this incident.
So do you think, Joanne, that that was a good way to respond?
Well, I forgot, did she ever make a public apology? But I feel like it's a good way to grow, I guess.
All right. Well, I think that actually is a great segue. Let me bring you to what she actually did. Let me share my screen again. In response to the controversy, Dana Schutz wrote, "I don't know what it is like to be Black in America, but I do know what it is like to be a mother. It was Mamie Till's only son. I thought about the possibility of painting it only after listening to interviews with her. In her sorrow and rage, she wanted her son's death not just to be her pain, but America's pain." This was her last comment on the painting. She did not attend the event at the Whitney or respond to further questions from the press. So I think that Joanne, captured a lot of what she said, but part of what she said was, I don't really apologize for doing this. I think it was not an act of cultural appropriation. I think it was appropriate for me to make this painting. And a lot of people who were members of the protest felt that she didn't necessarily engage as much with them as they would have liked. Oops, I stopped sharing, but I actually wasn't ready to do that. So give me 1 second. I'm going to bring you back to sharing. So here's the next step in the lesson plan. Conversation number 2. What could Dana Schutz have done during or after this controversy to improve the range of choices available to artists and museums when faced with similar situations in the future? Think about changes that could be made to law, culture, business practices, etc. So not in terms of the immediate issue of this painting Open Casket, but foreseeing other similar controversies or issues in the future. What could Dana Schutz have done to change the context, to allow for something better to happen in the future?
If I could start off. So this is
Sure.
definitely a fairly loaded question. But I think I I'm sure that there are like contracts involved between the artist and the museum, and that would cause like a lot of legal complications here and there. I think if an issue like this were to arise, then the museum does have a responsibility to do something about it, considering they have put this piece in their museum. And of course, the artist created the piece, so they have a responsibility to it. So I think one of the things that could or should be done is that the artist and the museum can host some sort of event or a platform where people's voices are heard, that the protesting, that the message behind the protest is clearly indicated somewhere, so that there is an understanding of where it's coming from. Because if it can at least be like put clarified in a way, then other people are also open to understanding what the protesting is. And then after hearing the voices of members of the community who are hurt, the artist and museum can decide if that painting should be taken down, or if perhaps they can create some kind of inclusivity where members of that community can put their own art that is related to that subject in place of the original controversial piece.
That's so interesting, all of those ideas. Do you think that the Whitney should have a general policy about this? So ahead of time, acknowledging some of our art may be controversial. If protest triggers a controversy, we will automatically take all these steps that Ria just mentioned.
I mean, that is kind of what I was thinking. I'm sure there's like a lot more to it than that that would have to be put in place. But I think having a policy like that where, okay, our piece is very controversial and for reasons that have a lot of support behind it, then those type of actions should probably take place.
All right, thank you. What other ideas do people have?
I was going to mention that making an artist statement maybe before the painting is in the museum might be a good idea to like state, like in her case, that this is for raising awareness, not for profit, and that she was never planning on selling it. Maybe if she said these things prior to, that it might have been less controversial. Like I can think about right now is like I've been studying the Philip Guston Now exhibition and like how museums don't want it right now, and but artists are mad about it, and he's an artist who paints the Klan members, and people are mad that this isn't happening right now, but they know where he stands as an artist and that he sees this as like an evil thing, but he still painted about it. So maybe if she had took a stance before, and that maybe like future artists do that too, it wouldn't lead to such controversy of like where they stand.
Although I think the Philip Guston example sort of contradicts you a little bit because Guston's been very clear over his career that he's not painting Klansmen because he's a racist. And yet, even though we all know this, it's still too hot for museums to touch.
Yeah. Like I was reading articles how he said like he was just kind of depicting it as like an evil, and that he's very anti-racist and like anti-Nixon and all that stuff. So yeah.
Paige, I want to ask you another question about this. If Philip Guston were black, would it be different?
I don't probably, yeah.
Other
I mean,
thoughts? Oh, go ahead. Keep going, Paige. Sorry.
I think it's it's a very sensitive topic, especially because it is like happening now too. So I think if Philip Guston was black, that it, I don't even know. Maybe it would have been like accepted into me. Actually, I don't even think that would even have been accepted into museums right now either, because they're saying it's just too much of a risk with that kind of subject matter right now.
All right, thank
So I
you.
really just think it has to do with the subject matter.
Other thoughts on what Dana Schutz could do to make situations like this better in the future? Policies she could advocate for.
I was thinking, like learning from this event for her future shows, she can like do a little more investigations and um before having like such a show like this, you know.
This is so interesting to me, Shin, because sometimes I've been thinking a lot about cultural appropriation. We're going to be talking more about it in the next panel. And sometimes I like to compare cultural appropriation to plagiarism. The problem isn't borrowing from other people. The problem is when you don't do the work. And so different people will disagree about this, but my position is that it would be okay for a white person to make art about African American tragedy if they had demonstrated in some way that they had deeply, deeply immersed themselves in the issue, that it had been very important to their career, their life, etc. And I think the feeling is that Dana Schutz, by listening to some interviews by Mamie Till, did not do enough work to gain credit for that. And I think that you're really speaking to that. Any other thoughts on this?
I think.
Oh, sorry.
Oh,
Makayla first and then Amani.
Okay, I'll make it quick. Um, I'm just gonna piggyback off of what you said about that. It just definitely came off a little disingenuous when she said, "Oh, I just listened to some interviews about his mother, like, you know, crying about the death of her son," and it just didn't sit right with me because it's like, that's all you really listened to was just some interviews about his mother talking about it. Like, it just, if you're gonna make a painting like that, I think you should really connect with what happens because I don't think the subject matter and the way she portrayed what looked like the subject matter in her painting, it's just it doesn't really align with like the purpose behind it, if that makes sense. Like it just seems like she just saw an opportunity. That's how it comes off to me, to be honest.
Thank you. Amani, go ahead.
for me, I was just gonna say about like the museums and their responsibility. Would not want museum taking down the arts right away. I think they can use that opportunity of to spark a new conversation in this topic instead of just taking away and avoiding it as a whole. So they can invite and include like artists, black artists, or like different like backgrounds artists to come to the conversation and then just have a genuine like no filter conversation overall instead of just being like, oh no, like a white person made a mistake, so let's just avoid it, let's just take the painting away. They can just talk about it and how can we actually do art as a human, as people, without like the race, like regardless of the race. So we will present the art in a very authentic way, like, do the research, as Kyla was saying, do the research and, like, going for more in depth in like what are you doing about, regardless of like who you are once you're painting. So I feel like if museums have these type of events where like also like people could attend and listen to, then more people will be educated, and I feel like we will have more conversation about these type of topics, and then we just won't be avoiding everything that's controversial down the road, which won't give us any progress, like as human and as a art, or because these things happened and we can't avoid history is there. So it's just that how can we learn from it, and how can collectively we can represent history in a very accurate but still artistic way. And I think that's only we can do that through research and through conversations, because as like the people who didn't go through it, people would never know unless we talked about with people who went through the thing itself. So having different like conversations for artists in the museums will be like a great option to learn more about it.
Great. And I'm going to bring us there in just a minute. So I'm really glad that you said all of that. Joanne, you wanted to jump in?
I really agree with Armani and everything. Like, sorry, Amani. Sorry. And then I feel like the museum should have like a review process beforehand to like selecting artworks, I guess. So kind of like what happened to, I don't know if you know, but like FIT's alumni show, like what happened with that in spring 2020.
Mm-hmm.
There's been a preliminary process to like review all the artworks and see what could potentially be like controversial about it, I guess. And definitely more research is needed.
And create a sort of more institutional structure through which that happens, maybe. I think that does happen at the Whitney for the biennial, that the curators have that in mind. And yet, I think they were also surprised by the controversy around this painting. Okay, there's one more step to this lesson plan. So I'm going to share the screen again. Hopefully this will not crash my computer. So there's just one little prompt to sort of think more about this conversation, and I'm hoping that this is at the right moment in the video. We've had some issues. Yeah, looks like it's good.
Can you hear us? Then I cannot hear any video
Oh,
sound.
you can't hear the audio? Oh, it was working before. Okay, I will abandon this piece of the lesson plan. Actually, there's one other way that maybe I can make this work. Give me just 1 second. And tell me if you can hear it now.
God, of course, I'm the first one. Hi.
Yes.
There was a question, I think, that was asked was, can a Black person see these pictures? And the last woman who I love, thank you very much, she said a white woman has to see the Emmett Till images. She does. However, I have to live it. So, because Emmett Till could have been my mother, my son, my child. The fact that the image in itself was abstracted is irrelevant. It's the horror of having to constantly see what has become a snuff film anywhere. And it's basically a warning. It's like, this is what's going to happen to you in the white space. It's a metaphor. I don't agree that the painting should be destroyed. I think it's amazing that we're all here today to discuss it. But I think what pisses me off, and I'm going to use some crass language, is that the Whitney does controversial shit, and they weren't prepared to deal with the controversial shitstorm that came afterwards. It is painful to walk into a museum and see the face of a little boy who was killed. Painful. And we see it every day on TV. And life, being a Black woman, I mean, Ta-Nehisi Coates has spoken, I'm not pronouncing his name correctly, Claudia has spoken about it in her book. We're not bodies on a wall. We're human beings. And I don't care how much you abstract that, it is painful to walk into a place and see that. And I don't think they were prepared to deal with the amount of emotion that comes with it and seeing it day to day. And that's why I think they were irresponsible. But I do applaud the gravitas of the creators being there. Do controversial, stand up for your shit, and you say I did it. But I agree. She probably wasn't a good idea for her to be here today.
So I played that to give you a sense of what the actual event looked like that they hosted. I wanted to give you a piece from the Q&A so that you could see the audience speaking back. This was supposed to be a prompt to get you guys thinking even more if you were having trouble answering this question, but I feel like you all answered the question already, that was the response to, that we need to have events like this so that what is controversial can become a learning experience. All right, so that is the sample lesson plan. Now let me tell you a little bit more about what the purpose of this was. Obviously, the purpose is one, to teach and think about cultural appropriation and the legacy of racism. But the other is to create a kind of lesson plan that we've been working on, Kyung-hee and I, for a while now. We're concerned that there isn't enough discussion in art and design classes about all sorts of issues related to labor, related to business, related to discrimination, related to cultural appropriation. And we've had trouble figuring out where these conversations fit in the curriculum. Should they be taught in art and design classes? Should they be taught in liberal arts classes that art and design students are taking? Should students in the business and technology school be learning these things also? And should it be in their classes, in their majors, or in liberal arts classes? Should it be, as we were discussing in the last panel, extracurricular, something that's happening maybe on social media outside of the classroom? And we haven't found good answers to that, especially because the curriculum is so packed, especially for our art and design majors. So our response to that was to create some mini lesson plans, things that could be done in 20 or 30 minutes, lessons that did not require any preparation or any homework ahead of time, that would begin to open up some of these questions. There are a couple of models for the kind of thing that we're doing here. I think the most obvious model is the Harvard Business School case method, which has been really influential in lots of different places. And another model that I'm putting in the chat right now is Bloomsbury Fashion Central, which has created a whole bunch of lesson plans about controversies in fashion and design. But we wanted to do something much more simple, much more stripped down, much easier to create and faster to teach, so that any professor in any class who wanted to engage with some of these issues would have something ready-made. I want to show you for a second. Give me just a second to bring it up. So this is the larger website that Kyunghee and I have been working on for a while. You'll see here's the link to the symposium that we're all at right now. Here's a link to one of the lesson plans we've created. But if you go to resources and click on lesson plans, you'll see that we now have 3 lesson plans up. 2 of them are actually about Dorothea Lange, because we got really interested in Dorothea Lange in the seminars that we've been running over the past few years. And then there's the Danishitz Open Casket lesson plan. And what we would like to do over the next several months is populate this section of the website with lots more lesson plans, all of which sort of follow this format, where an artist or a designer had to make a decision. And we set up the situation leading to this question, what am I going to do? We then pose to the students, as I just did, what would you do if you were in that person's position? We then say what the person actually did. And then we pose that second question, which I think is a lot more difficult, which is, what would you do to change the context? And I think that the students had a lot of good answers to that. I would add some other answers for this particular lesson plan. I think one of the most important is hire more people of color as curators. And this actually came up during the conversation that we saw a little clip of. Christopher Liu, one of the curators of this show, said, well, actually, the Whitney's doing much better on racial diversity because look at me, I'm standing up here and I'm a person of color. And the African American people in the audience did not buy that response at all. They said, you are Asian, we're talking about discrimination against Black people. It's a different situation. So having all sorts of diversity among your curatorial staff, I think is really important. But I think that you guys also came on a lot of other interesting answers. And then the last piece of the lesson plan is those prompts. We have 1 or 2 prompts to get people thinking more about how to change the larger context. And usually we're encouraging people to think about collective action. How could you, along with lots of other people, work together ultimately to make the world a better place? So I have a couple of questions that well, actually, before I do that, I wanted to throw it over to Molly for a second, because Molly Sean is the person who did the design of these lesson plans. And I was wondering if you wanted to say a few words just about your design process and putting it together, or anything else you want to say.
Well, thanks, Dan. Just about the design process in general, there were I was collecting images. That's what I do at FIT. I work with the art history department and I help them with their image needs. And there's a lot of things to consider. Especially one thing that Dan and I were talking about is the image of the artist Parker, I think Parker something, who was standing in front of the Danish.
Right.
Yeah, he was standing in front of the painting. And that's the only illustration that we used of the painting of Emmett Till, because again, it's kind of hard because you want to talk about the painting, so you want people to know what the image looks like, but then it's also you might be causing more trauma. You might be causing more pain to have it, to just like the poet said in the video. So what Dan had suggested was having a smaller image. Oh, sorry, I'm getting my buzzers going off, excuse me. Having a smaller size image so it's not quite as striking. And then also with the artist blocking the majority of the painting, it almost becomes a new work, like with this artist standing in front of it. And then it's kind of, you see that somebody's taken the action to protest this painting, hopefully seeing that image instead of just the painting as itself would be less harmful, and also it just kind of, the painting is at a farther focal point, so it's harder to see anyway, but you can still get the general idea of the painting without hopefully being triggered by it. So that's a consideration. And just thinking, PowerPoints can be kind of boring, obviously. So you want to have some visual interest, like with the Dorothea Lange lesson plans, but you have to be considerate of which images you're using and what they're using to illustrate. You also want to make sure to cite the images, give credit to the photographers so that people can look up the images on their own later if they wanted to see, for example, a higher resolution of the Dana Schutz painting. So those are basically my design considerations.
Dan, can you hear us? We
So I want
briefly
to
lost
throw it
you.
out to
Okay.
this. What about this lesson plan? How question Dana? Can you hear me now? Hello?
Then you were interrupted. Can you repeat your question?
You guys hear me now?
Yes.
Yes. No. How about now? Can you hear me? Oh.
Yes.
Yes, you can hear me now. Okay. Okay. I'm sorry,
Yes.
my connection keeps going in. So the question that I was asking was to the students: how could we improve this lesson plan? What about it worked? What didn't work? How could we shape this so that it works better?
What do you think, Lucian?
And while you are thinking about that, I will answer Patrice's after. Did I lose you guys again? Am I? I'm okay. Sort of.
Yes.
All right. So this was asking after there was the assessment. We very consciously decided that we wanted this to be a standalone lesson plan, that there was no work backwards. Because we want to some of the plans.
So then we are still losing you on and off. So meanwhile,
Hi.
yeah, then
Can you hear me okay?
You.
Can you hear me okay now?
Yeah, we lost entire sentences that you were saying 30 seconds ago. So can we
sorry.
go to students first?
Yeah, students, go ahead.
Students who have a better connection. Yes. Who wants to go first? Any suggestion for the lesson plan?
And I'll ask a specific question about this. There was another version of the lesson plan that I ran with one of my classes a month ago, in which the protagonist was different. It wasn't about Dana Schutz. It was about the curators, Christopher Liu and Mia Locks. And the question was, what should the curators have done in this situation? I'm not sure which it works as a better lesson plan. Does anybody have any thoughts on whether it's better to discuss what the curators should have done versus what the artist should have done?
I think it's better when you're asking about the artist, because the artists are the one making the art. And they're the ones that are putting the art, like they're bringing it to the museums. And while museums are putting the art up, they need art to go up on the wall for viewing. So I think it's important for artists to understand controversies and be able to handle controversies and how to go forward from them. I think that's actually a very important thing for artists to learn.
Great. Joanne.
I do agree with that, but at the same time, I feel like it's a 50-50. I think it's important to ask both sides. And what you said about hiring more people of color on the curator's team, I think that would help with like future revision.
All right, thank you. Any other thoughts? Now that you guys can hear me better, oh, go ahead.
Oh, sorry. I
No, no.
think honestly, while I agree with both, but I do think like, yeah, while artists should educate themselves when they do paintings or take responsibility and accountability for their job and what they did, and it's their job to teach themselves and educate themselves about where they went wrong, but also to have the conversation with people that they like offended with their art, no matter what it was and who they offended. But I also think the museums will be responsible to hold the conversations, as we said. So while the artists educate themselves and everything, I think if they work with the museums and they can hold events to learn more about the controversial piece that the artist did and why is it controversial, why it offended people and everything. So I think it's like they can need to work together, and I think it's a good to ask like, what would you have done if you were both? Because in that way, then people will just not think about the artists themselves, but also since museum have like accountability in this as well, they need to do something, right? And they probably most likely did something in the incident. So if you ask both sides, I think that will help people see it in a bigger picture and not just focus on that one artist or that one incident.
All right, so maybe we do it both ways. Go ahead.
Yeah, and also, I assume that most of the students who will be taking these lessons will become designer or an artist at some point of their life. So it's meaningful for them to start thinking about it in the shoes of an artist.
Terrific, thank you. So I wanted to answer Patrice's question from the chat because I think you guys didn't hear me talking at that point. Patrice asks, after this lesson plan, was there any follow-up assignment or assessment? And the answer is no, because we were trying to create a very discrete lesson that a faculty member could use in 20 or 30 minutes, throw somewhere in the curriculum when they found the time, because we're having so much trouble getting this stuff into the curriculum. And I would love to create other lesson plans that are more extensive. I do in my other classes on some of these issues. But the purpose of these lesson plans were really to be very, very short and limited in the amount of work that they require the student or the faculty member to do. I also want to point to Greta's comment. I think it would be to introduce the idea of apologies. What do they mean to society? What does it mean to women in particular? Greta, I think this is fascinating. I wish that we could turn your mic on right now to say more. Actually, we can. Is that all right, India, if we give Greta co-host status? Because Greta, I really want you to say more about this. Hi, Greta. I think you're still muted, though.
I think I
There
was
you
on
are.
mute. Yeah. Well, apologies is something that I've thought about a lot. I don't have the answer to my question, but I think that women are expected to apologize a lot. And I know that I stop myself from apologizing. And I'm not really sure how we got that way. And my daughter apologizes a lot, and I tell her not to apologize so much. That doesn't mean that I don't think apologies are important. I think they're very important, but I think they should be done selectively. So it's just a thought.
No, this is really important and an important moment of intersectionality here, right? On the one hand, don't culturally appropriate. On the other hand, don't force people to over apologize. And I don't know where we come down in resolving that conflict. Thank you. One other question that I have, do Molly and I recreate the problem in this event by being two white people creating a lesson plan about cultural appropriation of Black suffering?
I don't think so because on the panels that we were just in before, they were speaking how I forgot which woman it was that was saying, but she was saying how when she is going to these demonstrations as like, and she was a Black woman, she was saying how it's still the Black woman doing all the work with trying to make it more diverse. And when we have two white people doing it, it's kind of being like, yeah, we are trying to be more inclusive. Like, this is our way of demonstrating that we need to show diversity and we need to acknowledge the fact that cultural appropriation happens a lot where people don't even know they're doing it.
All right. Go ahead, Ria.
To add to that, I think kind of once again comes down to education, and who you've spoken to, because of course anything well-meaning can still be done incorrectly, but if you've gone through the avenues of like fully understanding the situation from all perspectives as much as possible, then it is important for everyone to have these conversations. It doesn't matter who you are, because these conversations should be had with everybody.
All right, thank you. Anybody want to disagree? Accuse Molly and me of being cultural appropriators? Because we're open to that. Any last thoughts on the model of lesson plan? If anybody has any other questions, you can put it in the chat box. We just have a couple minutes left for this panel.
If I could add something,
Sure.
I think it's especially important in our art and design classes, in our art history classes, liberal arts classes, that we talk about controversy a little bit more. I feel like that it does come up. It's not as though it doesn't.
No.
But I do remember that in one particular class I had taken with a professor, they had mentioned that there was like a rather unfavorable aspect to one of the very, very well-known, very well-revered artists in history. And learning that in that class, I wouldn't have known otherwise. I don't think it would have come up, despite the fact that there are articles about it out there. But to have these discussions that just because one aspect of somebody leads them to be in the spotlight doesn't mean that there aren't bad parts of them, and those don't get really spoken about as much. So I think being able to speak about controversy more in our classes, just in general, would probably benefit us all and kind of open our eyes to other perspectives as well.
So I actually want to throw that question back to you again, Ria, and to the other students. When we had the controversy over the MFA fashion show at FIT, did your professors raise that in class? Did you talk about it? And was that an important thing to do? Makayla, do you want to say something about that?
Yes, I was actually in my Indian like history of Indian art class, and my professor is white, but she's very, I would say that she's very educated on issues regarding racism and discrimination, because she, the day we found out, she immediately raised up the conversation about it. And it was a lengthy conversation, and it was like about 20 minutes long, and she was talking about how just, I can't remember exactly what she said, but she was just talking about how it's just not acceptable and that she didn't agree with what happened and that she thinks that it needs to be investigated. It was just, she raised up the conversation, which I think is important for professors to do, because we have more contact with professors than almost anybody else in the school. So.
Thank you, Makayla. Amani, were you going to say something also?
Yeah, well, because like last year when it happened, we actually, in my class, while professor talked about it, he didn't talk about it in a way of like to have a conversation about it. He was just like, oh yeah, you guys saw that, like it's the school's fault, they should have known. And he pinpoint the person that was responsible, but with no like conversation. And it was not like, oh, like what do you guys think about like these type of incidents, wherever. And I thought he was kind of trying to tiptoe around it, didn't want to open it and go deep in it. And I see that in many of my classes, like if anything happening in the world or like outside of school, and it comes into the class, they're always like, oh yeah, but I don't want to go into that right now. So I think like this is a great opportunity to actually sit down and talk about controversial topic without being too sensitive about the reaction, or like how everybody would react, without being like, without being too like careful around the subject itself. So I think this is a great opportunity for students to, because I feel kind of frustrated. It's kind of like, okay, it's happening in the world, I know, we can just talk about it. And we don't have to agree, but we can just disagree. We can agree to disagree and respectfully and just go about our days. But we can't just avoid everything happening around us because we're worried about how everybody around will react, or everybody will be too sensitive to that topic itself, like politics, or like, I don't know, just the cultural life and events that are happening as we go in school. So I think this is a great opportunity, and I really like appreciate this type of opportunity in school more often.
And one thing that I want to draw out of what Amani just said is that we can disagree about these things. And although nobody made this statement during the lesson plan, I would have been accepting of the statement, Dana Schutz did nothing wrong, and the people protesting against her had no right to protest. What's most important to me is that we have the conversation, one, and two, that students learn that people will be offended if you do something like this, whether or not you agree with that offense. You should be prepared for the controversy. And I think that's one of the things that this lesson plan teaches us, is that the Whitney was not prepared for the controversy, and that you can choose to do something controversial, but we need to help prepare you to understand when it is going to be controversial. And I think that we professors at FIT could do a better job with that, to help people avoid situations that they don't know what to do about in the future. Thank you, Patrice, for the comment. I think, Patrice, you should create a CET event about this. I'll show up for it. Any last thoughts? All right, so it's now 1 o'clock. We're going to get started on our next panel at 1:30. I don't have anything in particular to do in any of the breakout groups, but if anybody wants to suggest a breakout group topic and wants to go talk about something, that's fine. We have only praise from David Brody, nothing else. Okay, so we'll see you all in half an hour at 1:30 for panel 7, Nationalism, Cultural Appropriation, and Design. So we'll be coming back to